So let's look at the four major players in this war. You have US, you have Israel, you have Saudi Arabia, and you have Iran. Okay, all right. So United States and Iran, they're pretty easy to understand. What the United States wants to do is destroy Iran. Applause. Okay? Why? Because if you destroy Iran, United States would have complete control over Middle East oil, and it would control global trade for the state of humus, and therefore the United States can maintain its empire. Okay? So a really simple objective, let's destroy Iran. We don't care how, we don't care why, let's just go do it. Okay? Iran has another strategy, which is control, applause, straight up moves and destroy CENTCOM. CENTCOM is basically, the American military in the Middle East called Central Command. Okay? So those are two major military objectives of Iran, and we can understand why, because if CENTCOM is destroyed, Iran has complete control over the Middle East. Now Dubai, now Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait have to pay taxes to Iran. Now Iran, the new kid, is now the bully of the Middle East. Right now it's a hegemon. That is the political objective of this war. Okay? Israel is a bit more complicated, all right? For Israel, sorry. What other thing is humble Israel? That's the other thing, because even if you defeat the United States, you still have to deal with Israel, okay? And Israel is the great military power of the Middle East. So you want to humble them. You want to weaken them. You can't destroy Israel because Israel has nuclear weapons, right? You piss off Israel, those nukes start flying. You don't want that, right? So those are the three major political objectives for Iran. Control the surface moves, destroy SATCOM, and humble Israel. Okay? If you are Israel, actually for you, the strategy is different. What you want to do is this. You want to destroy CENTCOM and destroy Iran. Okay? Those are objectives. Why? Because if you destroy both United States and you destroy Iran, then you are the sole hegemon in the Middle East. Okay? Also destroy the GCC, destroy Saudi Arabia as well. Why? Because once Saudi Arabia is destroyed, all its resources belong to you, okay? And this creates something called the Greater Israel Project, which is what we will discuss next class. But as you can see, that's really important, is that even though United States and Israel are allies, their other strategy is different. Their objectives are different. In fact, they're in conflict, okay? They have Saudi Arabia. What does Saudi Arabia want to do? Well, destroy Iran, because if you destroy Iran, you have complete control of Destru. You can be a bully, okay? But you also want to destroy the US, and you want to humble Israel, all right? Does that make sense? All right. So by understanding how each player perceives the game, we can now understand how they will go about their strategy, right? So the United States just wants to destroy Iran. But as you can see, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran all want to destroy the United States. And how do you do that? You do that by force United States into a long ground war, right? Therefore, if you're Israel, you don't want to use nukes. Why? Because nukes would end the war too quickly. You want to drag this war out as long as possible to force the United States to send in ground troops. And you're like, well, why doesn't the United States use nuclear weapons? And the answer is already told you, the escalation ladder. It needs to justify itself to the people, okay? When you do anything, all right, when you do anything, you have to worry about certain factors, okay? You have to worry about troop morale. Your soldiers have to believe that they are fighting for a good cause, okay? You have to worry about public opinion. Applause. You have to make sure that the world is on your side. You have to worry about politics, political will. You have to make sure the people are unified. And you have to worry about enemy morale. You don't want to piss off the person, your enemy, so much that they go into an extreme, they jump the escalation ladder to extreme beyond your control. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. So as you can see, war is extremely complicated. It's not just about weaponry. It's not just about resources. It's ultimately about controlling the narrative, controlling the political landscape. Okay, marshaling the resources in a proper way that is strategically beneficial. All right. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So, yeah. So we just answered two questions. Will the NC use ground troops? Yes, it will, because Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel will work together to force a ground invasion, even though the United States doesn't want to do so. But unfortunately, the United States doesn't have a clear, coherent strategy. It's passive. Therefore, it can be manipulated into sending a ground invasion. Okay? And the second question is, will Israel or United States use nuclear weapons? And the answer is no, because it's not in their best interest to use nuclear weapons. Okay? Israel wants the United States to lose this war. And that means a long war that destroys the American political will to fight any more foreign wars. America loses, Israel becomes the dominant power in the Middle East. Okay? And so the last question is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and we'll answer that next class on Thursday. Any questions? Will clears throat. Will Americans take over Iran like what they did to Venezuela, like they captured their president? Okay, look, the strategy in the beginning was to do a Venezuela in Iran, meaning you go in, you kill a leader, a new leader emerges, negotiate with you, and surrender to you because you're too powerful. Okay? But Venezuela and Iran are two very different countries. The Venezuelan elite is very pro-American, meaning that their wealth, their children, their family is stored in America. Therefore, the Venezuelan elite have invested interest in negotiating a deal with America to protect their own interests. But for 40 plus years, America has sanctioned the Iranian elite, and Iran has become poor and angry and disgruntled because of that. Therefore, they lose nothing by fighting you, okay? So even though you've killed their supreme leader and you've killed many of their leaders, in fact, the elite themselves are unified in opposing you, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Any more questions? Yep. Alan, so I, in fact, have a question about the motivation of U.S. to involve in this war. Like, as you said, that U.S. want to control all the oil, so like they must destroy Iran. But I think this is like a little bit confusing because I think U.S. know that this war is really highly risk, and it can potentially even like destroy the whole systems. So why U.S. risk the risk of like whole system collapsing to like control the oil that Iran had? Okay. All right. So this is the key question that everyone's arguing about. Quite honestly, we're going to argue this for the rest of eternity. Okay. We're going to argue this for eternity because like no one knows and there's never going to be a clear answer. In fact, there are multiple possibilities. Okay. What I'm going to do today is offer you the most simple explanation. And next class, I will offer you a much more complicated explanation. Okay. But simple explanation is this. Again, this goes back to military doctrine, how the United States military works, okay? And the military doctrine is prevent the heartland from arising, right? So United States is here. This is Europe. This is Russia. This is Iran, India, China, Japan. This is Middle East. And this is Africa. All right. So the American military doctrine is this. The greatest threat to American power is the heartland unifying, okay? Why? Because if the heartland unifies, it can trade by itself through railways. But America is primary a naval power. Therefore, it requires people to trade by sea, okay? And so its strategy is to make sure there's never any cohesion in the heartland, either by making sure that no great power arises in the heartland. And that's why America went to war in World War I and World War II, because there's a great fear that Germany would conquer the world or Europe and Asia and create the heartland, okay? Therefore, America had to stop Germany from rising. So you either make sure no great power arises or you create so much conflict that they're always fighting each other. And that used to work before, okay? Now there's a problem. And the problem is the BRICS nations, Russia, Iran, and China are coming together. And if they come together, guys, that's a major piece of the heartland. And everyone else, Europe, Middle East, Africa with India was probably follow. Okay, because this is easier to trade in the heartland. It is trade with America, especially with the US dollar declining, right? So in other words, United States has no choice but to fight this war because that's their entire strategy to maintain hegemony in the world, to prevent the heartland from unifying. All right. Does that make sense? Because like once you destroy Iran, the heartland fractures. There's no way that they can now trade together anymore. They're still reliant on American maritime routes. Okay? America maintains the head is still the hegemon because it controls world trade. Whoever controls world trade controls the world. Whoever controls the heartland controls world trade. Okay? Because once you start thinking about geopolitics this way, the war stops looking like a simple conflict between two countries. It starts looking like a massive chessboard where every player is calculating 10 moves ahead. Think about it. If the United States destroys Iran, then the entire balance of the Middle East shifts overnight. Suddenly, every oil route, every shipping lane, every pipeline becomes dependent on American protection. And that means the United States doesn't just influence the global economy, it effectively controls the valves of the global economy. But here is where things become very dangerous, because Iran understands this logic perfectly. Iran knows that it cannot defeat the United States in a traditional military sense. The American military budget alone is larger than the next several countries combined. So Iran does not try to win by strength. Instead, it tries to win by strategy. And the strategy is very simple. Make the war too expensive for America to continue. You don't defeat a superpower by destroying its army. You defeat a superpower by destroying its political will. This is exactly what happened in the Vietnam War. The United States had superior weapons, superior technology, superior logistics, and yet it still lost. Why? Because eventually the American public no longer believed the war was worth fighting. Iran is studying that lesson very carefully. So what does Iran do? It stretches the battlefield. Instead of fighting one war, it creates multiple pressure points across the region. Iraq becomes unstable. Syria becomes a battlefield. Yemen becomes a proxy front. Lebanon becomes another front through Hezbollah. Suddenly, the United States isn't fighting one war. It's managing 5 or 6 simultaneous conflicts. And that creates exhaustion. Now, here's where another layer of strategy appears. Because the longer a war lasts, the more unpredictable it becomes. Oil prices spike, global trade slows down, stock markets panic, European economies start shaking, Asian supply chains get disrupted, and suddenly this is no longer just a Middle Eastern war, it becomes a global economic crisis. And when economic crises begin, governments start collapsing. Political parties begin fighting each other. Elections become chaotic. And this is why long wars are so dangerous for democratic countries. Authoritarian states can absorb suffering longer. Democracies cannot. In a democracy, the population must constantly believe the war is necessary. If that belief disappears, the government loses the ability to continue the conflict. And this brings us to the next major strategic question. What happens if the war spreads? Because right now, the war is regional. But if even one more major power becomes directly involved, for example, Russia or China, then the entire strategic equation changes. Remember the heartland theory we discussed earlier. If Russia, China, and Iran coordinate their strategies, they create a continuous land power stretching across Eurasia. That landmass contains enormous resources, enormous populations, and enormous industrial capacity. At that point, the United States faces a nightmare scenario because sea power is incredibly powerful, but it cannot easily control a unified continental bloc. And this is why preventing that alliance from fully solidifying becomes the central objective of American grand strategy. Not just defeating Iran, but preventing the emergence of a unified Eurasian power structure. So when you look at this war, you shouldn't think of it as a single conflict. You should think of it as a stress test for the entire international system. Every country is watching. Every government is calculating. Every alliance is quietly shifting, and the outcome of this conflict will determine something much bigger than who wins or loses in the Middle East. It will determine who writes the rules of the global order for the next 50 years. And that is why this war matters to everyone, even if they live thousands of miles away from the battlefield.